Newcastle are having a really tough time at the minute in the Premier League. I mean, across the board, to be honest. Where do you think Newcastle are at right now? Do you think the injuries are completely to blame for this drop-off?
You'd have to say it's definitely contributing, and I think
it's a massive factor.
Yeah, I'm surprised they didn't do as well in Europe. I know they had the group of death and stuff. I did fancy them to go through. I thought the momentum and all that kind of stuff would take them through. So, and they finished bottom, didn't they? So they're not in Europa League or anything. So I think that's a massive disappointment. I mean, like I say, I still kind of fancy them maybe top 6 if they get these players back. But again, when you get taken over by these clubs, it's not just a quick fix, is it? You have to kind of bide your time and stuff. And they did really well getting into the Champions League last season.
Well, they overachieved during it, didn't they?
And it was in part to what Liverpool, Chelsea doing crap as well, wasn't it? But
absolutely frees up a spot, doesn't it?
Yeah. I mean, say if come back next season, will there be top 4 contenders? It depends who they sign, isn't it? But or who the manager is. Will Eddie Howe, will he still be there?
Because I could see, if obviously we don't ultimately win the Euros and Southgate goes, if Eddie Howe gets removed from this setup at Newcastle, I could potentially see him being an England manager.
Yeah, I could see Eddie Howe being an England manager. I think that he'd probably be a really good shout, actually. But on Newcastle this season, right now they sit 9th in the league and they're 11 points off top 4.
Yeah, that's poor.
Which is really bad. Obviously, they had the group of death in the Champions League, but got knocked out of that. And then they also got knocked out of the Football League Cup by Chelsea. They're still in the FA Cup. Yeah. So that means that now, I know they've had an injury crisis, but they're practically out of every competition. There's still the potential for them to sneak into the top 4, but I have a feeling with the injuries that they have and how long some of them are going to be potentially out for, there's an excuse for them to not finish in the top 4 as well. So let's say come the end of the season, if Newcastle have dropped out the group stage, dropped out quite early in the Football League Cup, not got top 4, do you think that that's a really disappointing season, given it's meant to be them kicking on a little bit now?
I think at the start of the season, like most people would have thought, maybe top 4 push definitely. But yeah, I think it will be a huge disappointment for them. Right now, like you say, you can use the injuries as an excuse kind of thing, and they're playing 2 games a week in Europe, all that kind of stuff. But I just think, honestly, for them to progress, they just need a big name manager. I think that's the key.
Is that it?
Yeah, because I think you can sign, they've signed decent players, but to get to that next level, you need your superstar players. And with all due respect to Eddie Howe, he's not going to be signing like world beaters, is he? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, that's true.
With all due respect to Newcastle, I don't think they would go there to play under him. Like I say, if they had a Zidane or something like that, that would make a big difference.
An elite level manager.
But I also think, why would Zidane go to Newcastle until they've won something? I know money, but if you're Zidane, every club in the world would look at having you as their manager. Why would you pick Newcastle? It's also the destination. Like, no offense to Newcastle as a city, I love it, and I think it's a great place for a night out, whatever.
As a foreigner,
but as like a Zidane, would you move to Newcastle?
So Asprilla in the 90s, he went from Parma to Newcastle in like overnight or something like that. They signed him for like 10 million quid or something, like late 90s, and he was Colombian superstar in the Serie A, and he just signed. So it's possible. And like with Juninho, he went to Middlesbrough, didn't he? But I just think you need it. It's like Man City, they had, Mark Hughes or something like that when they got taken over, and then they eventually got Mancini, and that made the difference, I think, to attract the players. So I think that's what Newcastle need, just a big name manager first.
Yeah, well, I could see it happening. Yeah. But I also wanted to have a little chat on, obviously, Newcastle, I don't know whether it was down to Newcastle or down to Liverpool, really, but Liverpool absolutely decimated Newcastle the other day to the point where I think it was the most expected goals in any Premier League game.
7, wasn't it, or something like that?
In history. Yeah. So it wasn't like a little bit of a beating. Realistically, it should have been by way more.
Yeah, and the scoreline flattered Newcastle.
Yeah. Newcastle picked up a lot of goals. But on the injury crisis, so right now at Newcastle, the injured players are Tonali, Pope, Murphy, Target, Barnes, Wilson, Willock, Anderson and Joe Linton. So that's a massive injury list, right? And it's some of the ones that last year when you saw Newcastle doing really well, for example, Joe Linton and Wilson were outperforming what you thought they would. But like Wilson's injury prone anyway, you would have kind of expected that one.
Nick Pope's probably the most annoying one for him.
Well, yeah, Nick Pope is a tough one. But then when I actually looked at the starting 11 against Liverpool, where they got absolutely battered, I thought, do you know what? That starting 11 genuinely isn't too bad. So they had Dubravka in net, who obviously isn't amazing.
Wow.
But then the defence, you have Livramento, Shah, Botman and Byrne, which is a solid defence. And then in midfield, you've got Longstaff, Guimaraes. I don't know how you say his name properly. And I don't know who Miley is.
He's that young player. He looks about 16. Or something like that.
So that's probably another tough one. But then you've got a front three of Gordon, Isaac, and in fact Joe Linton must have come back because he played in that game. Gordon, Isaac, and Joe Linton. So realistically, apart from
expensive lineup, that.
Apart from Dubravka and Miley, that is a strong Premier League team, and they were getting ran round the park. I know it's Liverpool, but as I said earlier, they've been knocked out of practically every competition they're in, other than the FA Cup. So, does some of this blame now start to be pointed at Eddie Howe?
I just think because they got into Champions League and they were every group game was like a massive, huge game for them. So I think they were just going 100 miles an hour in all of those games, and it's just taken its toll, I think. And I think the players have just been knackered. Like Trippier, he completely fell off the cliff.
They've looked shad, Trippier, probably one of the best signings that they've made since the takeover, and he's just been a shadow of his former self over the past couple of games, giving away goals and just being a bit fucking stupid, really.
Yeah. Would you think Trippier will still get in the England squad? Should he come back fit?
I think he will, because he's one of Southgate's favourites.
Southgate fucking giving all these old England players glizzy every 2 minutes. But I don't know with Newcastle. As I said earlier in the episode, I don't think that they'll even manage to get into the top 4, and I don't know if I even see him getting in the top 6.
No. I mean, I just think one of the big parts of what happened last season was because Chelsea and Liverpool were so poor. So there was a space became available, and it was only natural that I suppose Newcastle took that space.
Yeah.
So I kind of like, with Liverpool being back now, and Newcastle kind of where they should be, but then they've spent all that money, is 9th place. I suppose look at Chelsea as well, but.
Yeah, I just don't. I honestly think, come the end of the season, should this form continue, people will start to question Eddie Howe again.
Yeah, I think if they finish like 8th or something like that, and then go out the cup early, and a good manager or a world class manager comes available, I think Howe will go. I think he'll be sacked. And
I think there's a lot of loyalty among the Newcastle fans at the minute, for good reason. As you said, every Champions League game was like a momentous occasion in the city. They'd been waiting years for this. They had fucking drone shows for the Champions League games. You know what I mean? It is unbelievable, but right now they're just simply not doing good enough, considering the players they've got at their disposal, in my opinion, even with the injury crisis. And I think it comes back to, like you see this week, every team has this excuse like ready a lot of the time. I think Newcastle have got it. Manchester United all season they've been saying, well, we've had this injury and this injury and this injury.
Liverpool, we've got injuries as well. We've had
there's always bound to be injuries, but that's the whole point of having a good manager. Like when there is a couple of those key players missing, they can step it up, and the other players at their disposal. It should be more about the system, not the individual players.